Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Maiden Edition of the NGPUK webinar series. Our topic today is GP Partnership, the discussion. So what we'll be doing is we'll be digging deep and sinking our teeth into the nitty gritty of the GP partnership model, having a look at the partnership portfolio through the eyes of experienced and distinguished Nigerian GP partners. We will try to tease out your ideas about the GP partnership model, identify your concerns, and hopefully meet your expectations at the end of the day. I am your moderator, Dr. Harrison Offiong. I am a locum GP myself, and so I'm really interested in hearing what the speakers say and wondering if I'll be convinced to switch to becoming a GP partner at the end of the day. So that's my first challenge for the speakers, to convince me to become a GP partner at the end of this talk. But before we start, let's go through some housekeeping. So only one speaker or only one person speaks at a time. So if you're not chosen by the moderator to speak, keep your microphone on mute. During the question and answer session, you can raise your hand and the host or moderator myself would pick you to speak. If you prefer not to speak, you can send your questions via the chat box. And if time permits, the moderator will ask on your behalf. But if I need to ask a question for you, we'll need to work out how you're going to pay me for that job. Okay? There's no fire alarm test today. So if your fire alarm goes off, please follow the protocol in your own house. And before we start, can you all check that your ovens and cookers are all switched off? Okay? Make sure you register to ensure that you receive your CPD certificate at the end of the day. You can do that by going to the NGPUK website and scroll down to events. After the webinar, you would also receive a feedback survey. Please complete it so that the speakers can get your feedback. In the meantime, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. As an outline for the day, we will have a short presentation by the organizer, and then we'll take the first two speakers back to back. We'll have a brief interlude where we have a question and answer session before introducing the third and fourth speakers. And if time allows, we would have, during the last question and answer session, we will hear from a new GP partner, Dr. Ayo. But first up, we have the chief organizer of today's webinar. The reason we are all here, our very own NGPUK member, Dr. Ada Eze Uzo Okonkwo, whose survey identified the doctor's educational need for this discussion on GP partnership. So I would temporarily hand over the reins to her to briefly share with us the results of her survey. Okay.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Hello. Yeah. Hello. Can you all hear me?
Yeah.
All right. My name is Sudaz. It was while talking with a few of the people who helped us organize it, like Ijema and Wenger and Harrison, that were able to come up with this program. Obviously, the idea of having this webinar came from a personal need of mine, but I'm happy that every other person felt that they required the same kind of education as well. Initially, I started with a survey just to kind of get the ideas of everybody to see whether this is something that we could do as a first seminar, and everybody was happy with that. So I'm just going to go ahead and share a quick screen of the outcome of the survey so that we kind of get a brief understanding of what exactly the survey came about. So let me find that and share. Okay, so this is the first slide. When I did the survey, there were quite a few questions, just about as much as the Survey Monkey allowed me to, but this is one of the first slides. I picked just 3 because I have just about 5 minutes to talk here. The question here was, if you are not a GP partner, given the right circumstances and education, will you be happy to become a GP partner? As you can see, 70% of the respondents came back with a yes. Now, altogether, the total number of people that responded generally were up to about 50 to 60. I think it was about 60 because some of them came in late, but generally it said that there was a need for, my internet unstable, there was a need for given the right circumstances that people want to become GP partners. Now, the key word, as I've put up here, is right circumstances. And obviously one of the key circumstances is the pay. Pay is a very, very big factor. So I'm hoping that one of our able speakers will be able to convince us the reason why we should go ahead to do that. And obviously one of the speakers that I had a chat with, one of the things that he said that caught my mind was that he's not here to tell us that partnership is the best option, but basically to discuss if it is a better option for you as a person, which I found that as an interesting point of view, really. The other slides, I'm hoping the slide thing is still showing.
Yes, it is.
The question is whether you felt there was a need to educate more GPs about the importance of GP partnership model. As you can see, that was a 99% yes. And this is a feedback from both partners salaried out of hours. Everybody else was saying yes. And I felt that RCGP as a school, I just finished GP training in the past 2 years, and I know that the GP partnership model was not talked about, or if they talked about it, I wasn't there, but I like to believe I attended all my sessions and it wasn't talked about. So I came out of GP school feeling that locum was the way for me, because my friends and my immediate circle were all locums. So being that I might want to go into partnership, I'm now struggling to find people outside my circle to be able to ask, you know, give me a bit of this information, give me a bit of that information. And I understand that GP partnership model is a lot, so you just don't jump into it without the question. So I'm also hoping that one of the speakers will be able to tell us whether NGPUK can fill this role in terms of educating young GPs about the model. So if the RCGP is not doing that, is this something that we can do to help ourselves and also take it from there? So that should be a question that hopefully Harrison is keeping note of. The other slide quickly is, do you think the GP partnership model is, in this current climate, is it sustainable? Now, it was a varied answer. The yellow screen here, the yellow chat here says, I do not know. And I'm assuming this is a mixture of everybody that responded to this, meaning that amongst us GPs, we do not know where exactly this model is going to. But my point of view is, if you don't even know what GP partnership model is all about, how can you answer whether it will be there in the next 10 years, whether it's, so there is a lot of information, bad conceptions, misconceptions that are there. So yes, so quite a few questions have generated. Harrison, hopefully we will not have lack of questions for this session. But basically, based on this survey, that is what led to us organizing this and being able to educate ourselves. And I want to obviously give a big thanks to Harrison, Wenger, Quincy, you've been marvelous. Margaret, Henry, Oge, you guys have been very upcoming. Even Onyinye, I'm sure you're here, you're listening. They've kind of, you know, very much, we are here to help you with this. So that's me done, and I hope we all learn a lot to help us make informed decisions going forwards. Thank you very much. So let me stop share.
Okay, thank you very much for that survey results. Thanks for organizing this. I mean, you raised some brilliant points there. You know, 99% said yes to the need to educate us on GP partnership. So it seems that most of us have come in from a Nigerian perspective. We've come into GP without really knowing much about GP partnership, and we have decided to take the alternate or more popular route of going down the locum way. So I think Following up from that, we need to jump into it. We'll go to our first speaker. So Dr. Henry Akintunde has been a GP partner for about 7 years. He's one of six partners in a town practice of about 12,000 patients. He has a professional interest in medical education, and he's a primary care TPD, an examiner for RCGP, and a general practice tutor for medical colleges in the universities of Oxford, Leicester, and Warwick. He's also the author of Smart Tips for Success, Become a Better Version of You. As you can see, his loaded portfolio, I think his talk would also be loaded with information, and he'll be talking to us today about the basics of GP partnership, GP contracts, partnership models, GP forward view, etc. So please listen attentively, and if you have any questions, get ready to ask them after the second speaker or submit them in the chat box. So Dr. Akintunde, I'm going to unmute you and hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harrison, and thank you, Ada. It's a pleasure to be here today in the company of other speakers to just contribute my thoughts to this discussion on partnership. So today I've got 15 minutes to just go through the basics, and hopefully we can all build on that. And during the question and answer session, we might be able to drill down to the nitty gritty of what people want to learn about the partnership. So essentially, I'm just going to do that. Thank you. So GP partnership. I actually found out that there is what is already called the Partnership Act, and it's been in existence since 1890. And there's a formal definition for a partnership there. Relationship which exists between persons carrying on a business in common with a view of profit. So from that premise, there's always been the question, are you first doctors or business owner as a partner? I think fundamentally, going by the definition of partnership, the business seems to be the first common point. That's what brings you guys together. And obviously, you know that not all partners are doctors. So I will think that the business takes precedence over the professional bit. Now, it doesn't mean that we will undervalue the professional bit, but when it comes to partnership, the business is very important. And general practices as a whole are of varying sizes. I've known general practices that are of about 5,000, 7,000 patient population, and I've known others that are as large as 40,000, 60,000. So varying sizes. But the common thing is that the services, their services are contracted by NHS commissioners to be able to provide general medical care to a particular population in a geographical area. So the NHS commissioner have a contract with general practices and say, would you be responsible for providing general care for our patients in this particular defined area? Now, for it to be a GP type partnership, I forgot to mention that the Partnership Act, GP partnership is not only restricted to general practice. We know in law, their solicitors can have a firm of partners, accountants have partners. So GP partnership is one of such partnership. But the critical thing about GP partnership is that at least one of the partners in a GP partnership must be a GP. Now, all the others don't have to be GP. They can be other health professionals like nurses. In some practices, practice managers are part of the partners in a practice. But in most instances, GP partnerships comprise mostly GPs. And the arrangement is such that the GPs are the business owners, they run the business, but they also provide clinical services, and they agree to share profit based on a predetermined arrangement, which is usually stipulated in the partnership agreement. We will be hearing more about the partnership agreement later by one of the other speakers. But the common way, particularly in partnerships where it comprises only GPs, is that you share the profit based on the number of sessions you do. So if there were, say, 4 partners who do 8 sessions, and there are 2 other partners who do 6 sessions each, so that would be about 44 sessions. So at the end of the day, all of the profits will be divided by 44 sessions, and each partner goes home with that corresponds to the number of sessions that they do. So that's sort of like the basic in terms of the definition of what a GP partnership is. So the GP contract, I think the first starting point is understanding that as GPs or GP partners, we are not employees of the NHS. So although the population of the UK see us as such, technically and in reality, we are not. And this is where the difference begins, where GP partnership is different from hospital consultants. So we are independent contractors to the NHS. And those 2 words are important. Independent because the way we run our businesses is not determined. No one determines that for us. It's up to the partners to determine how they run their business to be able to achieve a profit and meet the stipulations of the contract. But wherever there are contractors, there has to be a contract. And these contracts are sort of the critical thing that also differentiate GP partnership from other forms of partnership. The contracts are held between the CCGs on behalf of NHS England. Now, most CCGs in the United Kingdom are now fully delegated. Only a few are still partially delegated. That means that they can now commission primary care on behalf of NHS England without NHS England being involved. Those that are partially delegated means it's sort of a joint commission of primary care along with NHS England. But so CCGs are the primary holders and they do it on behalf of NHS England, have that contract with practices. The contracts can also be with single-handed GPs or what is called the single partner GP, which is kind of an oxymoron because there's no partnership if you're the single person, but it's more like single-handed GPs. I wouldn't go too much into that model. There are still a few around. Where I work, there's been a single-handed GP for a very long time, but very recently it's taken on 2 partners, I think because it's coming towards retirement. Generally speaking, the thought, I don't know how to validate this, is that they tend to be more profitable. And I can see how that would be if you're mostly getting other people to do the clinical work and you're keeping most of the profits. But I think they are not that sustainable because there's just so much to do in a partnership that it's very difficult for me to see how one person could do it. So it's not something upfront that I will advise anyone to really think about going into. But there are limited companies also that are also contracted to provide healthcare to a particular population. So any of these 3 could hold contracts for the CCG. And in the contracts, there are mandatory requirements and services that need to be provided as part of primary care, but there are also optional services that partnerships can choose to provide if they so desire. Now, in terms of partnership models, the contract is what sort of drives the type of model. And based on the contract, there's the General Medical Service or GMS. The General Medical Service is basically a national standard contract. So every year, the General Practice Committee of the British Medical Association will negotiate a contract with NHS England to be able to then apply at the local level. Now, more or less, in reality, is more like an update every year. The real big change in terms of the GMS contract was in 2004. And so every year, a little bit is added, a little bit is taken out. That's sort of what's really been happening since then. But every year, the contract is agreed, and that is then applied locally. So each CCG will then ensure that they can then hold that contract based on the nationally agreed contract with their local practices. And as at 2018-2019, 70% of practices were operating under this contract. So the vast majority of practices in the UK are under the GMS practice model. There's also the PMS, which is personal medical services. This is a type of contract that is negotiated and agreed locally. Now, so much of what will be in the contract will still mirror what is in the GMS. However, it gives CCG the flexibility to be able to get practices to do other things that meet the needs of the local population, such things that would not have been in the general medical services contract. Now, this came into being. Most practices started applying to become PMS practices around 1998. But about 2014, a review started. Historically, PMS practices were better paid than GMS practices because in addition to the core GMS contract, PMS practices had what was called an MPIG, minimum practice income guarantee, that was paid on top of that to help them meet the locally agreed contract. So over time, the NHS felt that many PMS practices were not doing so much different from GMS practices, but were earning substantially more. And the review then started, and three things happened. Either practices proved that they were PMS practice and retained that status, or switch to a GMS practice straight away. I applied to become a GMS practice, so either they switched or they applied to become, they stayed as PMS practice or switch to become a GMS practice. But the beauty of PMS practice is that they had the flexibility to tailor requirements to local needs. So it's not something that is gone completely. About 26% of practices in the UK are still PMS practice. Now, the other model is the more rare type of model, which is the APMS, the Alternative Provider Medical Service. This is the one that then allows non-medical personnel to be able to hold contracts. So limited liability companies to be able to provide services to a population in a particular area. But it also allows, for example, medical professionals to be able to provide healthcare, primary care to peculiar populations, like populations of the homeless, for example, or asylum seekers. The GMS and PMS doesn't cover that often. So the APMS offers even more flexibility, and very few practices, very few contract holders fall within that remit. If you see, that's about 96%, so it just leaves about 4% for other types of models. So what are the, since we are primarily contractors, I think it's important to understand what's in the contract, because that's sort of what defines what we do, really. In the GP contract, there's an agreement on the population that your practice will be covering and providing healthcare need for. There's agreement about registration processes. There are discussions about you maintaining that list of patients and under what circumstances a patient might be removed from your list. It also talks about establishing what is the essential medical services that the practice must provide to its patients. And I'll talk about this a little bit more shortly. And it sets standards for premises, for workforce requirements, for under what conditions inspections will happen, and what sort of oversight needs to be provided. It sets out expectation for how you should involve the public and how you should get your patients involved. And it would outline key policies in areas such as indemnity, how to deal with complaints, liability insurance, the need to have insurance in place, clinical governance, and under what conditions the contract could be terminated. Now, based on the contract, there are five types of services that GP practices provide. So there's essential services. The essential service is the core service that a GP practice provides. And this is the one you provide, that GP practices provide between their working hours of 8 a.m. and 6:30, such as diagnosis and management of illnesses, health promotion, referrals to other care providers like secondary care providers. All of these fall under the essential services, and these are the mandatory aspects of the contract. There's also the out-of-hours service. So in the contract, the default position is that a GP practice or GP practices are responsible for providing even out-of-hours care for their patient population, but they are then given the option to opt out. And this was one of the big changes that came with the 2004 contract, that practices could opt out of providing out-of-hours care. And this is what the majority of practices do. As a matter of fact, I don't know any practice that doesn't opt out of out-of-hours care. Now, where the practices then opt out of out-of-hours care, the CCG needs to find a provider to be able to provide out-of-hours care for that particular population. So by opting out, you are also losing some money, but I would think that for what it's worth, it's not too much money to opt out of. Additional services are services that again are assumed that contract holders will provide, but they don't have to. Again, they can opt out of this. So they include things like cervical screening, minor surgeries. These are additional services. Again, most surgeries provide this because at the end of the day, it's business, remember? As many things as you can do, and the NHS has been so smart to just break the money into small bits. You take on many of those things and provide them. And in general, it also helps your patient satisfaction if they don't have to go to too many places, since your practice can provide that. Now, enhanced services are mostly nationally agreed bits of the contract that again, contract holders can choose to provide, but oftentimes again, most providers will choose to provide that. And sometimes they can be divided into the direct enhanced ones, which are the nationally negotiated ones as part of the annual contract that the BMA negotiates, or they can be local enhanced service where your CCG finds a need and comes up with something that individual practices can subscribe to being part of and get paid for that. So for this year, for example, doing a health check for people with learning disability is an enhanced service. Certain types of vaccination other than the basic childhood vaccination types and flu, immunization, pneumococcal, other than those sort of standard vaccinations are also under the enhanced services. And then there's locally commissioned services that can take any form as far as it's something that the CCG comes up with to meet a need. And this can vary from year to year. So there will be times that your local CCG will say, we want to run this pilot and we will pay you for this if you're part of it. And you can subscribe for that. And that just runs for a specific time period and doesn't go beyond that. Now, is the GP partnership model sustainable? My answer is absolutely. I believe that the GP partnership model is sustainable. And the reason I believe this to be the case is that GP practices are the most efficient arm of the NHS financially because they are run by business owners. Now, in many other arms of the NHS, you can always talk about where you can find savings. But in GP, because it's primarily run by business owners who, as with all other businesses, are interested in increasing income, reducing expenditure to increase their profit, it makes it very efficient. And that's the only way that people in primary care, it's estimated that we have our patient contacts of between our patient contacts that take place in the NHS, about 87 to 90% of them occur in primary care. Yet in primary care, we have less than 10% of the budget. As at 2018-2019, it was 7.1% of the budget. Now, I don't think the government can come up with any other model where it's cheaper. Plus, in partnership, because it's your business, you do, only God knows how many hours you give into it that you're not paid for. So I really can't think of any other model that any government can come up with that will still ensure that the level of care that is provided right now is provided and yet will not cost anything more. There have been talks from the days of Andrew Lansley about NHS wanting to be privatized and all of that. If anything, what we are seeing, there are lots of talks about Tory government wanting to. Now, I don't know whether they truly want to or not, but what we are seeing in reality is that they are committing funds to try to ensure that the GP partnership model survives. Because I believe that somewhere in their mind, when it comes down to the nitty gritty, they know that they are getting primary care at a bargain. Somebody did a calculation and came up with a figure that for every 10-minute consultation in general practice, it only brings a profit of £5 to a GP partner that sees a patient. So if you think about that, in 1 hour, you really are making £30 from seeing the patient. Now, that's more than what I will pay my handyman to come and work for me. So I believe for that reason, the partnership model is definitely sustainable. When I was coming into partnership, it was about the time that federations were coming in and all of that. I don't know how it felt in other areas, but the talk where I was like, oh, we need to come together to form big organizations so that companies like Virgin and all that will not take away the job from us. Now, I was quite naive at that point. I was just coming into partnership. But the longer I've stayed in partnership, Virgin couldn't possibly take over primary care in the UK. I don't see how they are going to be able to do it and still make profit. But I believe some modifications may likely be made to the current model, but it may happen over time. Some of the modifications may be that what currently exists as primary care networks may ultimately then become GPs. It would become smaller practices coming together to form bigger practices to make it more sustainable. But I really don't see the partnership model going anywhere. Now, why become a partner? I'm not going to go too much into details of this because I think Oge is covering this, but this is just from my point of view. And like Adeza said at the beginning, I'm not here to say this model is the best thing for anyone, but I certainly believe that particularly for us as Nigerian GPs, we need more of us to be involved in GP partnership. And these are the reasons from my point of view why I believe more of us need to be involved. And what sort of person should be thinking about a partnership? If you're the kind of person that likes the idea of owning your own business, to be a business owner, I particularly like the idea that I'm working with other people on something that is our own. We can shape it how we want. We can be strategic about where we want to take it to. I like that idea. If you are looking for a platform that enables you to be creative and to be innovative, then I think partnership comes for you. When I just joined partnership, my practice at that time was not having medical students. The partners that I met had medical students before, and they kind of found it too stressful. And I was passionate about teaching. I wanted to carve a niche for myself in medical education, and there was an opportunity to take medical students from one of the universities. I somehow managed to convince my partners that I could come up with something that would not be too stressful on all of us as a whole, as a practice. And I sort of came up with a strategy that fitted into the system we already had in place for supervising registrars in such a way that whoever was supervising registrars, because one person for every surgery takes responsibility for supervising registrars in my practice. And so just fitted that in, and everybody liked it. And it's now almost 7 years down the line. We've kept having medical students. In fact, we now have medical students from 2 other universities. So a very good opportunity to apply your creativity and innovation. Synergy, bringing together your effort and those of other people to produce something better than what you would have the sum of what you would have all individually produced. If you like flexibility, control, and certainty, I like, wherever possible, I like to be involved in the discussion that concerns me. And this is one of the things I like about partnership. Is my time up, is it? Okay, I'll round up now. I like that idea. Flexibility and certainty. I like to know what I'll be doing this time next year. Partnership provides me that opportunity. Career progression. There's always the opportunity to go down different pathways as a partner. And this information comes to you without necessarily going out to ask for it. I think if you were a locum, you would need to make a lot of effort to get much of this information. Good income, I'll leave that to Quincy to discuss that better. Now, but more importantly, this is the one that I'm really passionate about, is opportunity for influence. There are so many things we talk about not being, that affect us as international medical graduates in particular, or people that belong to the Black and minority ethnic group. Now, if you are not on the table, you don't have a say. I think that's just the brief summary of that. And partnership in many instances provides you the opportunity to be on the table. Now, there are some bits that, for example, medical education, it will be very difficult to be involved in that as a locum at the level of GP registrars, program directors, and all of that. As the days I was talking about, oh, this thing was not taught when I was a trainee. I thought actually that's partly the responsibility of the program directors to have added that to your half-day releases or whole-day releases. But if you're not on the table, you can't make that influence. And right now is the best time for you to become a partner if you're thinking of becoming one. 20,000 golden handshake for coming into partnership. I think that's another good reason. So I'm going to stop now. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we can't hear the handshakes because everybody's muted, but I'll clap on behalf of everybody. Henry, thank you so much for that passionate and packed session. I mean, there was so much information coming at me from all angles. I know we gave you a Herculean task to compress it into 15 minutes. We may have gone over a little bit, but I mean, that's the life of a GP. You never do anything in 10 minutes during the consultations. I think just as a summary, the key things you mentioned that you don't have to be a GP to be a GP partner. It's something that we can explore a bit more. You mentioned something about profit sharing based on the number of sessions you do. So the return is based on how much you put in. You talked a lot about single-handed GP partnerships and how it's being phased out with so much to do. Is it sustainable? PMS, GMS contracts, different types of services. And then you also said something about you put in so much hours that you don't get paid for. So that's interesting, and it sort of links into our next speaker. We would have the second speaker, and then we would address the questions. So please ask the questions as keep your questions ready from the first speaker, and we will address them after the second speaker finishes. Also, I've noticed something going on where all the other speakers are answering some questions in the chat box. So if you have questions, we can answer them on the go. Just put it in the chat box, and our speakers and other GP partners that are here with us would be able to provide answers. So moving on to the second speaker, we have Dr. Margaret Ikor, a GP partner at Holderness Medical Practice. She is an Associate Director of Primary Care for Health and York Medical School. She's the current Faculty Chair for HOMBA, and Ridings and a fellow of the RCGP. She is one of the co-champions for the Yorkshire and Humber Clinical Research Networks for AITs and First 5 GPs. She has a keen interest in research and is currently facilitating several COVID-19 trials within her own practice. I mean, she obviously has her hands full, so there's a way she's doing it. You know, she's managing to achieve work-life balance, and that's what she's going to talk to us about. She will talk us through how to manage workload, family, balancing pressure from external influences like RCGP, LMC, CQC, NHS England, etc. So, Dr. Iko, over to you.
Thank you very much, Harrison. And thank you also, Ada, for setting this up. It's been amazing. And thank you, NGPUK, for allowing me to talk about the partnership on this platform. So I think I've been tasked with the slightly easier bit in terms of I'm just going to talk about managing work-life balance with the family and how I juggle admin with my clinical work, and a little something on GPs with specialist interests, and really just touch very briefly, conscious of time, on the various stakeholders that we engage in the community. And I think the easiest way for me to actually talk about all this is actually just talk about myself. So when I came off the scheme of VTS 15 years ago, I stayed as a registrar in the practice where I was an ST3 as a salary GP, which suited me really well at the time because I had just bought a house, had a young family, and to be fair, the responsibility of partnership did seem rather